sports psychologist with the USOC, and I focus exclusively on winter sports. The other sports psychologists there work with the summer sports, and it's a pretty small community. We've got a lot of good sports psychologists here in town, so it's definitely a resource for everybody to take advantage of. So I'm pleased to talk a little bit tonight about a number of things related to the integration of sports psychology and youth sport development. It's like 6:30 to 8. I promise I'm not going to sit up here and talk for an hour and a half. It'll put you to sleep. So I want it to be an interactive dialogue. I'm going to show some videos and hopefully make this stuff a little interesting for you, and at the very least keep you awake. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about a model of youth sport development and participation. I work with senior level national team athletes, Olympic athletes. I was in Sochi for the Olympic Winter Games with a lot of my colleagues. And so I'm going to try and sort of connect some of those experiences to the experiences of youth sport development, coaches, parents. This isn't going to be just sort of a, be healthy, be happy, be balanced. I mean, make no mistake, I'm interested in helping athletes develop into elite athletes with consistently excellent performances. But I want them to develop as people as well as athletes. So I'm going to try and tie those things together. Hopefully you can hear me in the back. Hopefully this thing will work. All right. So the developmental model of sport participation, and this isn't going to be a research lecture. I just got to kind of sort of lay the groundwork for some of this for you. I went to grad school at Florida State University and worked with a guy named Anders Ericsson. And if you've done anything in youth sport at all, you're very familiar with the model of expertise that he's developed, he and his colleagues. Who's heard of the 10 years, 10,000 hours to become an expert? Anyone? A couple people? Thanks. So, and he's evolved a little bit in his thinking over the last, 10, 20 years or so on this. But one of the things that I've noticed in working with athletes from a very young age all the way up to sort of Olympic level athletes is we have a habit of taking some things and almost sort of getting sort of too much of a good thing at times. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that model and some counter models that take sort of a harder look at the development of expertise. And it's pretty important in terms of what we do to help our youth sport athletes develop. So deliberate practice, practice doesn't make perfect. Deliberate practice makes perfect, right? So just some of the basic tenets of the model. Deliberate practice requires effort. You got to really put something in. You can't just go through the motions, right? Doesn't necessarily lead immediately to social or financial rewards. And so it takes some persistence. I mean, nothing surprising there, right? It's not necessarily for enjoyment, at least immediately. Some sort of long-term gains, potentially. But how do we get our kids to persist and to keep growing and keep developing? 10 years, 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is sort of their suggestion for becoming an expert in any domain. But this requires early specialization in sport-specific practice. Does anybody remember just like saying, hey mom, hey dad, I'm just going to go out and go play? How much does that happen these days? We're usually sort of shuttling children to one organized activity or another, and it's very structured, and it's great if you can just go out in the backyard and build a snowman or whatever, but it seems like less and less this is the norm. There's not a lot of free play. And there's a whole lot of competition to make the high school soccer team or to earn a scholarship or to become an Olympian, and absolutely, you got to work very hard to get there. But there's some pros and cons to this model. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've found since this originally came out in the early 90s. So 3 main hypotheses of this deliberate practice model. Elite athletes specialize in their main sport at a younger age than sub-elite athletes. Sort of first tenet. They also start deliberate practice at a younger age, and they accumulate more deliberate practice hours than sub-elite athletes throughout their career. I mean, the basic idea here is if somebody starts at age 2 on skis, as compared to somebody who starts at age 9, and they both practice deliberately going forward, the person who started later is not ever going to catch up, right? So these are kind of the main tenets of this deliberate practice model. The thing is, in looking at them, with the exception of a few sports where you really do kind of have to peak before maturity, figure skating, gymnastics, in sports where you're going to potentially peak a little bit later and have long-term involvement that really does lead to expertise and elite performance, a lot of these tenets don't really hold up. So what do we do instead? The issue is that, yeah, you can go out and play violin for 4 hours a day deliberately for 10 years. But are you going to persist? Is it going to be enjoyable? And I absolutely was that kid who was great at guitar and never wanted to practice, and I'm still mad that mom didn't make me do it longer, right? So how do we balance these things? How do we push our children appropriately while also finding a way for them to be internally motivated and invested in this and persist in the sport? So this model doesn't really consider the physical and psychosocial costs. I want elite athletes, and I don't want kids to get burned out along the way, so it's something we've got to be cautious about. So what do? An alternative model presented by Jean Cote and some of his colleagues, the developmental model of sport participation, as the name implies, really focus on a developmentally appropriate pathway toward elite sport performance. And this has been adopted by the ISSP, the International Sports Psychology Group, as their sort of position paper on how they think we should do this. None of this is like proprietary. Feel free to take pictures, do whatever you want. I want as many parents and coaches as possible thinking and talking about these things. So how do we develop elite athletes and have them persist and enjoy what they do? So they sort of look at 3 distinct ages, stages. We get this concept of deliberate practice, but what about deliberate play? Kids just don't get to necessarily go out and play as much as they used to. Sampling years, age 6 to 12. Specialization years, 13 to 15. Investment years, 16 plus. So these are some general guidelines, and every athlete, parent, coach has to sort of figure out what works best for them. But during those sampling years, those early years, the recommendation, based on looking at the athletes who have become elite in many, many areas of sport, the recommendation is that they participate in a variety of sports. It's what kids used to do a lot of the time. You know, go play baseball, go play soccer, go play lacrosse, go play whatever they want in the spring and the summer, then winter comes around, ski, etc. And hopefully that's what a lot of people do here. Seasonal. But I find that competitive seasons often overlap in very difficult ways, not just in terms of getting an athlete to this sport, and his or her brother to another sport, but it can make it hard to sample a bunch of different sports. It's one of the realities we have to deal with. Deliberate play inherently is about being intrinsically motivated. It's fun. It's immediately gratifying. Maximizes enjoyment. So the key there is in childhood, they recommend, based on looking at the developmental pathways of a bunch of elite athletes in the last 20, 30 years, during that early childhood period, 6 to 12, try a bunch of different things. In many ways, it gives you psychomotor fundamentals to then apply to a sport that you decide to specialize in a little bit later. It also increases creativity. And as you gradually change that ratio to more deliberate practice and less deliberate play, you'll see the ratios change a little bit. I absolutely love soccer, grew up on it. I've been watching U.S. soccer team for a long time. We're still, in my opinion, a bunch of athletes who happen to play soccer. And the rest of the world is still light years ahead of us. Some people nodding their heads. I mean, when I grew up playing soccer, it was, some structured practice, but you go outside and kick the ball around for hours and hours and hours with your friends and brothers and whatnot. I see a whole lot of practices still where there's a lot of running without the ball. And what's the one thing any college soccer coach wants to see more than anything else? Ball handling. First touch. Having a good first touch. having good awareness on the field. How do you get that if you don't touch the ball 1,000 times a day? All right? I see a whole lot of athleticism from our elite level soccer players, and it's changing. But with a few exceptions, not a lot of creativity. I'm not suggesting we play football like the Brazilians do. I think we can have our model and it can be very successful increasingly. But what about the stuff that you don't get in structured practice? You get it in deliberate play. So it's not just in terms of not having kids be burned out and persisting in sport. It directly affects elite performance. So what are the implications for coaches and parents of this? 10,000 hours is still involved, but not necessarily in the way that Erickson maybe had suggested earlier in his career. 3,000 to 4,000 hours of sport-specific training. And what we find is that as you chart the paths of elite athletes, the differences really start to emerge a little bit later, 16 plus. With about 10,000 hours of total involvement. So that doesn't mean 10,000 hours of deliberate practice necessarily. That includes 3,000 to 4,000 hours of sports-specific practice along with deliberate play, organized activities, competitions, etc. It is a better pathway to expertise. Less burnout, kids who stay involved in sport more, fundamental skills. And I mean, come on, if you want to make Park City High School soccer team, lacrosse team, and travel team, and if you don't have a foundation of skills by the time you're 13, it's going to be hard, right? I mean, that's the reality. So how do we balance those things? And I worked with a lot of figure skaters, and I've worked with a lot of gymnasts in the past. And for those that really need to peak at a pretty young age, it's incredibly hard to balance this because you do have to specialize a lot earlier than this model suggests. But a large majority of our athletes can have some of that deliberate play, bring in some of that creativity, persist in their sport more, and do it in a very happy way while being elite. So, this is the one to take a picture of. What does this mean? And again, these are general guidelines. How much time should we be doing in each category? So for that sampling age, where you're trying a variety of sports, say it's 6 to 12, about 80% of the time doing deliberate play and a lot of different sports. Only about 20% deliberate practice time. And, we've got a 4-year-old. I'm, always dealing with, are you that dad who's like, okay, let's do sports like stuff today? And are you working on, first touch? And so it's fun for me to know that, hey, I'm doing just great. He's got lots of deliberate play that he can do. We can just go out, kick the ball around, and unless he asks for some skill feedback, I just want to make sure he has fun. I also want him to be an Olympian, but right, we're going to get there. So what's involved in there? I know a whole lot of 12-year-olds who play year-round soccer, year-round baseball, school's the least of it, traveling teams. It's not inexpensive, right? But are they going to persist? Maybe, maybe not. So you can see the ratios change as you get into that 13 to 15 range, about half and half, maybe fewer sports, 2 to 3. Because by about that point, you really kind of got to think, and it's I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 13. As you start to sort of funnel into a sport of choice, age 16 to 22, you really got to be doing a whole lot of deliberate practice by that point if you want to be one of the best in the world. So one of their recommendations is that about the end of primary school, around age 13, give or take, it's a good time to have a conversation. Do you want to keep doing this sport full time and to lay out sort of a pathway? If this is your favorite sport and you really want to be great at it, as well as do it for social reasons and whatnot, you got to sort of begin thinking about that shift to deliberate practice and not just deliberate play. And that can be a really interesting time, right? There's the comparisons they make at this age. I'm better than so-and-so, I'm faster than so-and-so. And then it can sort of disappear for a while, and the sports psychologists in here always want everybody to work on the process, and outcomes will take care of themselves. When, you know, even at this age, there's leagues where nobody keeps score except the parents know exactly what the score is. So you're familiar with this? Yeah?
I was wondering, what happens after age 22?
You retire. You have your whole life to figure out what you want to do in an actual grown-up. It depends on the sport, right? For a whole lot of athletes, you know, if they persisted, and it depends on the sport. I mean, we've got sliders on the hill right now. Some of the best in the world, bobsled skeleton, North American Cup. They'll be out tomorrow and the day after that as well. We want to see some great sliding. It may take them 10, 12 years to learn how to read the ice on 7, 8 different tracks around the world, and some of the best in that sport still have sprinter speed, and they're built like linebackers. They're as fast as running backs. But it's taken them 12 years to learn how to drive sometimes, and they're in their 30s and 40s. If you're a gymnast at age 22, probably going to switch to something else. So it depends on the sport, it depends on the requirements, and to some degree it depends on motivation. All right, so integrating this, what do we do as coaches and parents? A colleague, Jim Taylor, has got a good book, and I received no royalties from it. I just think it's a good book. He talks about positive pushing, and he's a sports psychologist, works with a lot of sports, a lot of athletes. This book of his isn't about sport necessarily, but I think it applies in many ways. By the way, if any stranger tells you how to parent your kids, you should probably throw something at them. So it's not the point of this. And the people who always show up at these talks are like the parents that we're all dying to work with anyway. So spread the message to all the other parents of the leagues that you go to who aren't here. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know with this, but it's an integrated model. What are 3 pillars according to Jim? Self-esteem, like that word, you know, from what the 60s on has had this connotation, and we've almost gone too far in some ways with unconditional love. But what about the competence mastery piece? Decisions have consequences, right? And if you want athletes who can ultimately be their own coach, their own sports psychologist, everything independently they need when they're competing under pressure, they have to be resilient. They have to know that they can do it. And that only really comes if they've been given those opportunities to see the consequences of their decision within a loving, supportive environment. Ownership, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I've been a coach. I've been a coach enough to know I never want to do it again because it's really, really hard. It'd be great if there were robots. Just go out and do this, right? You'd win a whole lot of things, maybe. But what's the point, right? So we talk a lot about athletes wanting to take ownership of their behaviors, of their attitude, of their mood, of their sport, of their training. And then you see athletes who take ownership so much that they never listen to anybody, right? So it's a bit of a balance. How do you do that? But done well, it's about fostering that intrinsic motivation. So remember that deliberate practice model is not necessarily about fostering intrinsic internal motivation. It's about getting good by a whole lot of repetition. Maybe if I had more intrinsic motivation, I would have stayed with guitar longer. Who knows? I just wanted to play Stairway to Heaven after that was done. Emotional mastery, the full range of emotions. The guys in here, what's the emotion that we're allowed to have? What's that? You said something. By the way, I pick volunteers, so you might as well raise your hand. Sir, what's your name? Eric. Thanks, Eric, for volunteering. What's the emotion that men are allowed to have in our culture? Minimal emotion at all. Stoic. How about anger? Right? We have a full range of emotions, right? They're not good or bad. They just are. It's just information. And yet we're socialized in many ways to suppress them, to put them aside, to push them down, to block them out. Or, you know, hurry up and cheer up and be in a good mood. And emotions aren't good or bad. They're there for a reason. It's just your body trying to get you to pay attention to something. So I think sometimes We've seen parents, coaches, etc., who have gone so far out of their way to minimize our children's pain, we don't necessarily allow them to experience the full range of their emotions. And if I go to get our son flu shots, I'm like right up there with them. It's like, I know that's gotta hurt, right? So the full range of emotions to which we're entitled, it's a useful source of information. And if they don't learn to be resilient and understand and listen to their emotions and use it as information at this age, what are they going to do when they're in the gate for their final run in the Olympics of slalom? So Jim's model of positive pushing. Bottom line's pretty basic, right? Just push on the right things. We push on values. I mean, nothing new, right? It's a pretty competitive town. A whole lot of high achievers in here. Go to any park at any day of the week, at any time of the day, and you're going to see somebody playing sports, and often you'll see a parent talking to an 8-year-old saying, why aren't you working hard enough? You are embarrassing. It's tough, and it happens. It happens all over the country. So what do we push on, and why? So, some things that will help us push in the right ways. We should push. I don't think we should just sort of stand back and say, figure it out. We should push. Just push in the right ways. We got to model these things. How do we solve problems? How do we cope? How resilient are we? How do we model our own emotional awareness? Instruction, teaching, coaching, put around values and beliefs, effort, right? All the cliches, but it's pretty important. Managing the environment, your activities. What's the coaching environment like? You know, I think, you know, when kids sign up for something with their parents' help, it's for a week, a season, or whatever. So you pretty much do it all the way to the end, unless there's clearly sort of an abusive environment there, and then you pull them out, you make some change. We got to monitor those things. What are the values that exist in that environment? Right? Push on values, not just outcomes. And I got to say, I mean, I've done this for 20 years or more. It's like you're not going to get away from outcomes. Everybody's acutely aware of the score, of whose kid scored a goal, of how fast you got down the mountain, of who's getting a scholarship. We're a very results-driven society. And I get measured at the end of the day by how many medals our athletes win. So we're not going to get away from outcomes. We talk about process, we talk about focusing on sort of mastering skills. The reality is, I don't mind if people talk about outcomes, especially if it's 4 years down the road, or 6 months down the road, or if you're under age 25 and the frontal lobes haven't developed yet, like a week down the road. That's as far as you can plan, right? It's fine to talk about outcomes as long as it's acknowledgement that working toward that outcome is just another way to demonstrate that you've mastered your skills. All right, so this is a PACE sports psychology model I came up with. Absolutely nothing new or groundbreaking. When I used to teach this in grad school, I literally just needed a way that I could remember it. So I just came up with this mnemonic, and I was working with golfers and with the pace of their putt, etc. So you can actually work on these things in any order, but I sort of teach them as an ordered sequence. Perception, it's your self-awareness of your technical skills, tactical skills, the environment, your psychological skills and strategies. What's going on in terms of outcome, performance, mastery, process goals. Usually goal setting is done really poorly. A coach, a parent, somebody says, here you go, here's your goal, we're going to win state championship. Well, okay, what's your buy-in to that if you're a 15-year-old skier? So we want that to be that negotiation, that it comes from you, that it feels like it's challenging but reasonable, as opposed to just something you stick on the wall and you don't look at for a year. What's your identity as a competitor? So we do a pretty good job of teaching mental skills, psychological skills. My experience of being at World Championships, the games, is that if you're not really resilient, those skills might not be there for you under pressure. I mean, you've heard millions of coaches and athletes say pressure is just a lack of preparation, right? So how do you know you're prepared? You can only prepare so much for the games because nothing's like it unless you've been to the games already. So what's your identity? Why are you doing it? This is how it ties back to that developmental model of sport participation. if you're doing it for the right reasons in the right way, then not only you're going to be a little bit more balanced, a little bit happier. By the way, it's how you consistently achieve optimal performance. So again, I want excellent athletes. Positive adaptation to adversity. There's always some adversity out there. How do we reconnect? So the second part of that, activation. So eyes off, you don't have to remember that. But just basically your ability to pick yourself up, your ability to relax. We work with heart rate variability increasingly. So, if you're in a really good shape, really fit, low heart rate, right, resting heart rate variability, the time between beats, you want it to be pretty high. It's how well you're coping with stress. And I wish I'd invented the stress doctor, because it's like $2 on the iPhone store or whatever. You don't need to wear a heart rate monitor. You can just put your finger over the camera light and it can read your heart rate and heart rate variability. Do it every day for 30, 40 days. You'll get your heart rate variability zone. So basically, low heart rate, high heart rate variability. And the intervention for it is just breathing. It's just breathing. You can be in really great shape, but if your heart rate variability is suppressed, you're not dealing with stress all that well. You're not dealing with pressure all that well. And that affects concentration. So when I've got 5 minutes on a ski lift with somebody, or I'm in an elevator and somebody says, "What do you do?" Oh, okay, that's what your title is. What do you do? I decided to try to help athletes focus on the right thing at the right time every time. And as a parent and a coach, that's kind of what you want. It's athletes who will show up focused, ready to go, on demand. Internal, external, narrow, broad. I'll give you an example of how this might work. But all these things affect execution. And any sports scientist knows that coaches have got it figured out, and then we come in after them and try and explain what it is they figured out. And I can't say it any better than this, Coach Sasha Breer. Performance is on-demand execution of what you learned. And a performance is under your control. A result is an outcome. So if you want good results, focus on the performances that are under your control. Performance plan is pretty simple, pretty clear. You got to commit to it, trust it, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can evaluate it. A score, attitude, commitment, effort. There's got to be something beyond a time or a score as a way to evaluate your performance. So give yourself a 10 out of 10 for attitude, 10 out of 10 for commitment, 10 out of 10 for effort. Great, 30. How many of us, how many of our children, how many of our athletes can honestly say, you get a 30 out of 30 on all these things for every practice, every sport, every competition? So imagine with those things, you've got a child, an athlete, somebody that you're coaching, and the perception is, I've got to win this game. I've got to beat somebody down the mountain. If I don't, somebody's going to be disappointed. Or I'm not going to get that scholarship. Or I'm going to get kicked off the team. Or I'm not going to be able to walk in opening ceremony. What effect do you think that might have on your level of activation? Would that relax you? Probably not. Would it elevate things a little bit? Probably don't want to see too much of this. All right, good to go. And the connection between physiological activation and concentration is that it narrows. You want your concentration to narrow to the right things. Well, we've got athletes going 85 miles an hour down the bobsled track right now, and some of them will say, "How'd you drop that?" And then the rest of them will say, "Yeah, I saw you standing there, and you look kind of cold." And I'm like, how on earth are you able to take that in? And if you do, does that mean you're not concentrating fully on the task at hand? Well, it depends. If they're really good at it, they might be able to do both. The issue with being too physiologically activated is that attention might narrow too much, and you might completely get tunnel vision and miss the pass, miss the play, miss the gate. So that same athlete, now their perception is, yeah, I want to win. I absolutely want to crush everybody else. I want to be that person who's the best in the world. So how do I do it? I'm prepared. My coach has prepared me. I've been here before. Pretty simple. This is my plan. Let me just execute my plan. Activation comes down or comes up to the right zone for that athlete. And then concentration can be manipulated at will. You can let in as much as you want, you can gate out as much as you want. And then it makes it that much easier to consistently execute your plan. If you do all these things correctly, then you reach your goal. This is absolutely my shameless plug for the Olympics, and also gives me a chance to have a drink of water, so hopefully this will work.
Tonight, Russia has set the stage for you. We are writing a new page in Olympic history. Welcome to the 22nd Olympic Winter Games.
American Sage Kotzenberg becomes the first to strike gold in Sochi.
Can't even believe this is going on right now. It's pretty surreal.
She's almost at 83 miles an hour. And it's done. It's a medal for Team USA. The leaderboard is peppered with American skiers. Gebhard over his right shoulder. Got it.
That right there was the greatest run of Gus Kenworthy's life.
Josh Christensen saving his best for the finals. And he nails it. The third time in U.S. Winter Olympic history, Americans have swept the podium.
Shaun White gets it going.
This is an amazing performance you're witnessing right here.
Back to back with those big spins.
What a run this has turned out to be.
One lap to go.
Down the stretch they go.
It's neck and neck.
That Kuso on the line, and it's so close.
Score! Team USA wins!
62 years of waiting is finally over. Never seen anything like that. This is going to be a close one.
A great check, but great star! Maddie Bowman has won gold medal in ski halfpipe.
Farewell games, farewell drives, farewell runs are always special. Noel Tiger's race has the lead medal.
Mother Russia, meet your newest Olympic champion. Jamie Anderson claims gold in slopestyle.
All right, Mr. Miller.
It's always an adventure. It's always, what is he gonna do next? Like a bullet over the final jump, down comes Bode Miller to the finish line. Leading up to the line at Sochi, and finally has his giant slalom goal.
And Sochi belongs to Caitlin Farrington, America's newest golden girl in the halfpipe. David Wise has won gold.
To be out here representing where I come from and the country that I live in, it's just amazing.
They've trained together 17 years for this moment.
They make it look easy.
Merrill Davis and Charlie White are Olympic champions, the highest score ever recorded. They did it with a flair.
We did everything that we could and justified 17 years of hard work, and to come away with a gold medal is so amazing.
What a moment here for Meryl and Charlie.
Okay, so let me get out of this and get to another presentation and get to some of the nuts and bolts, some of the psychological strategies that we teach. And again, I really think this stuff has to rest on a solid foundation of a firm identity as a person and as a competitor. And there's lots of different psychological skills, mental skills, lots of different ways to teach them, different sequences, different order. This is a model that I like quite a bit. Psychological skills for both practice and competition, and they're a little bit different, but I think fundamentally they rest on a whole lot of awareness. Right? If you aren't aware of something, it's pretty hard to change it. So I sort of say this tongue-in-cheek occasionally, but if you want to perform perfectly, it's easy. Just make yourself a perfect person, and then just go out and compete naturally, right? It would be kind of an ideal way to do it, though, isn't it? mean, it's pretty hard to not practice well, to not be sort of emotionally stable, and then go out and flip the switch in competition. And athletes do it sometimes. It's a pretty pressure-packed way to prepare for performance. It's not the easiest way to do it. So a lot of coaches, a lot of athletes, say pressure's a lack of preparation. You know, we want our athletes to know exactly what they have to do in as many situations as possible, on the field, off the field. So let's do an awareness test. And I'm going to show some clips that I've just ripped off YouTube. If you've seen this awareness test and you know the answer to the number of passes, keep it to yourself so that the person sitting next to you will potentially be surprised. But it's going to ask you to focus on one shirt, white or black, and count the number of passes.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
It was actually produced by Cycling UK because too many bikers were getting hit by people who just weren't looking for them. But, you know, if you don't work on that awareness piece, it's pretty hard to integrate any of these other skills. So let's talk about some of them, and I'll try and make them come to life. And it's funny, I've been showing this clip for a number of years, well before I moved here to Park City a year ago. And in the last year, I realized that it was somebody who was on the K40 right here in an after-school program. So I'm sure that at some point I'm going to do this presentation and somebody's going to raise their hand and say, "Oh yeah, I remember doing that." It's like, great, hopefully I get to meet her at some point. Self-talk. How many people have heard their kids self-talk in one way or the other? Yeah. What do they say? Since you raised your hand in the back, what did they say?
I mean, I just hear my son say, "I can do this," or "I'm going to get this done."
Awesome. That's great. It's much better than, "Oh, I suck," right? Because what can your coach or you as a parent do? Okay. What sport? Give us an example. Same volunteer in the back.
What was an example?
What sport?
Minecraft. Oh, what sport?
Oh, Minecraft.
I'm skiing.
Skiing. Okay. So if that run sucked, what can you do about it? Okay, this next run, ski in such a way that doesn't suck. Thanks, Mom. That helped quite a bit. Right? So we got to describe it instead of judge it. And it's so easy to get into a value judgment with our self-talk. Right? Should have hit that earlier and just rolled my edge a little bit and just, you know what? I should have done this, I should have done that. Albert Ellis was a great psychologist. He said that's called shooting all over yourself and it doesn't help, right? So make it specific. In general, we like to think self-talk is about self-instruction or motivation or both. And it can serve a number of purposes. But here's an excellent example of some quality self-talk.
I'll be fine. I'll do it. Well, here goes something, I guess. I can do this. I'm gonna jump. Whoa, my ski's slipping off.
Remember, never snowplow, okay?
No snowplows.
Keep it straight, you'll be fine.
Okay. Straight. Do you go faster on the end run?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much?
Same steepness, just longer.
Well, just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all.
Yep. Have
Just a
fun.
bigger 20. I got it. Okay. Here. I go. Just the suspense at the top of the first time makes me out. That's the only thing, it's so fun! Huh? 60 seems like nothing now.
So I love that. And so you can hear the self-talk change, right? After, you know, here goes something. And I've shown this for a number of years now. I'm at the games and I had athletes about to enter the field of play and look at me and say, here goes something, right? It's having an effect. And I gotta say, I mean, it's not easy being a coach. I don't know who's coaching her at the time. If you heard in there, just don't snowplow. If I say don't snowplow, what's the last thing your body's gonna hear, right? Fortunately, you followed up with, you know, just keep them straight, you'll be fine. Right. So you heard the self-talk being instructional, right? Do this, you know, outrun, and motivational. Okay, here goes something. And then at the bottom, oh yeah, it's great. Pretty hard to find a good video of emotional control. I'm going to show somebody sort of mindfully sitting peacefully. It's late at night, you'd be asleep. So the bottom line is this. Emotions, as I've said, are not good or bad. It's just a useful source of information. So the more you can help your kids, your athletes, tune into that information, then you get to make more informed decisions. You get to be more resilient. So, as you can probably guess, emotions affect concentration. So, here's a good example, not of emotional control. You see the smile there at the end? Now, granted, not something that we ever want to see from our kids or the athletes that we coach. I don't really think that the catharsis hypothesis is true. Usually frustration just leads to more frustration. You see the little smile there at the end? So, potentially a little McEnroe-esque. So with emotional control, that does not mean control. It does not mean block it, push it away, force it down. You're wasting a valuable source of information as an athlete. It's just your body trying to get you to pay attention. If you're scared, your body wants a plan. If you're sad, your body wants you to slow down. There's some reason that it's there. And if you push it away, it's just going to get louder and louder. And then you end up smashing 4 or 5 rackets in the Australian Open. Attentional control. So I put these in this order because our emotions affect our attention, as we saw in that base model. What do? 50, 60, 80 years ago, we did a really good job of trying to get people to never choke. And pretty quickly realized it ain't going to happen. So what do you do when it does happen? Well, you can lower your level of physiological activation. You can also find a way to get refocused. And something is always going to pull you out of your plan. Almost always. So what do? What's your response? How do you quickly regain that focus? You can train it. You can prepare for it. So here's a pretty good example of seeing the field.
greatest game there is. Right, Hardy?
Yes, sir.
The greatest game there will ever be.
It's you and Paul.
All by your lonesome. I think it's time.
Time for what?
Time for you to see the field.
The field? I see the field. It's 445 yards long. It's got a little red flag at the end of it. It's 12 strokes ahead of it. Come on.
That ain't it. Because if you seen the field, you wouldn't be hacking at that ball like you was chopping weeds out from under your front porch.
Just give me the club.
Sorry, I'm going up here. You want to take that hack away?
All right, what's the field?
Fix your eyes on Bobby Jones.
He's a piece of work there right now. Knock it out there, Bobby.
He's practicing. Almost like he's searching for something. Then he finds it. Watch how he set this up right to the middle of it. Feel that focus. You got a lot of shots you can choose from. Duffs and tops and skulls. There's only one shot that's in perfect harmony with the field. One shot that's his. Authentic shot. And that shot is going to choose him. There's a perfect shot out there trying to find each and every one of us. What we got to do is get ourselves out of its way. Let it choose us. Look at him. He in the field. Can't see that flag as some dragon you got to slay. Have to look with soft eyes. See the place where the tides and the seasons and the turning of the earth all come together. And everything that is becomes one. You got to seek that place with your soul, Jimmy.
I've never asked an athlete to seek that place with their soul, but I like the concept. I like that sort of soft eyes. I mean, you don't need words to describe that, right? I mean, you saw him laughing, joking around, and then what does he do? What transformation do you see occurring? Immediately focus, right? I mean, you can see it in his nonverbals, right? His body language. You don't do that under pressure if you haven't practiced it. Anybody play golf in here? So you got to the range, working on something, your swing coach is giving you. What's the typical way we practice golf out at the range? Scrape hit, scrape hit, scrape hit. It's not how we play golf. And yet we go out onto the golf course, and a lot of the time we're playing golf swing because we're mechanical out there instead of letting it flow, instead of trusting our training and concentrating. So next time you go out to the range, 6 months from now, get a bucket of balls, save the last 10. These are imagery skills that we're going to get to. Play that first hole in your mind. So by the time you get out there, it's easy to flip that switch. It's easy to turn on that concentration. So as I've said, I don't think goal setting's done very well. It's our next skill. Often it's just goals that have been given to you by somebody else, et cetera, but done well, it should be really motivating. It should drive you. They can be both outcome goals. I mean, we say it's not every 4 years, it's every day. If you don't put in the work every day, you're not going to get to the game. So, how do we assess these things? Personal mastery goals, which is I'm going to keep my hands forward all the way down the mountain. I'm going to keep a good rhythm, totally under your control. It's a personal mastery goal, a process goal. Performance goal, you can call them outcome goals, performance goals, whatever. The further you go, the less they're in your control. If my goal is to beat everybody down the mountain by, 500th of a second, you have the best performance of your life. If 3 people are faster, you're not going to be on the podium. So it's fine to have that outcome goal. I don't want athletes who want to dominate everybody else, but the way to get there is to be really, really careful and deliberate about the goals that you set and the goals you help your children and athletes set. So let's talk about
goals are
this from a
also
coaching
important
perspective.
when it comes to sports or life. And I think there's 2 types of goals that you should set. There are objective goals, meaning when I was in high school, my goal was to be objectively to be the state champion. But I think there's also process goals. What I mean by that, that might mean that I'm going to do extra workouts 4 times a week, not 7, but 4 times a week for 15 minutes. I'm going to do something extra. I'm going to work on my double leg. I'm going to lift. I'm going to go on an extra run. Right? So that's a process goal, meaning I'm going to do this extra hard work 4 times a week for 15 minutes each time. So, 4 times 15 minutes is 60 minutes, an hour. So at the end of each week, I know that I did an hour extra. Well, a simple thing like that, that process goal increases my chances of accomplishing my objective goal, which is being a state champion down the road. So I know for some athletes, or even non-athletes, you have goals to be state champion, national champion, Olympic champion. But sometimes some young athletes' goal is just to make varsity. Sometimes it's just to have a winning record, which is okay too, because not everybody's meant to be an Olympic champion, and that's okay. I mean, sports isn't all about being an Olympic champion because some sports aren't even Olympics. So it's really about reaching your full potential and setting goals that are realistic and attainable for you.
I think some good examples of setting some process goals. I'm going to put in 15 more minutes of work, 4 days a week. It adds up. So if we buy into the concept that pressure is a lack of preparation, and you know for a fact that you're outworking everybody else, as much as you can tell anyway, you're going to feel more prepared. You're going to feel less pressure. You're going to be more resilient in the face of imagery. So you're going to see a lot of this on the hill tonight, tomorrow, the next day if you go up there. And I hate comparing ourselves to the Canadians in winter sports, but they do some things pretty well. So I imagine my competitive routine. And this is not just, I imagine myself winning. And it's like, come on, if everybody imagines themselves winning, it doesn't mean everybody's going to win, right? We're talking about consistency, sustained competitive excellence. This is absolutely one of the skills that our athletes practice the most. And you can do it in a fun way. So there's internal imagery, I see it through my own eyes as if I'm doing it. External imagery, as if I'm watching myself perform a task, and both are good. Internal imagery tends to be a little bit better in terms of skill acquisition and execution. But for our sliders up on the hill, I don't know, 49 seconds, going 84 miles an hour. You're not on the track very much. You only get 2, 3, 4 runs a day, maybe 3, 4 days of training, and then you have a slide in the World Cup. So you better get additional training somehow. And it was great when I came into the sport and started talking to them about these skills, and they were like, oh yeah, we got this. We do mind runs. I'm like, oh, cool. I'd never called it that before. And they all do it. So here's a good example.
Hello class, and welcome to Bobsleigh University. My name is Kaylee Humphreys, world and Olympic champion, and today's lesson is going to be on dancing. What exactly are they doing? Well, like every other sport, we're visualizing our way down the track. So you'll see their hands move, and everything's about feeling in our sport. So some people, hands high, hands low. You'll see some guys spin around numerous times. Really, they're trying to feel their way down the track, trying to make the steers like they would on the track. We only get so many runs and trips down the actual track, and so by doing it over and over and over in your head, it gives you more runs, more trips, and more feeling. Bobsleigh University for today's lesson on bobsleigh dancing. Until next time, I'm Kaylee Humphrey.
So she mentioned visualization, call it imagery. Those are both visual senses, but we have a few others. So I recommend that you help your athletes work on using all of their senses to be better prepared. When you walk into the arena or step out on the field or you're about to get into the gates, what are you going to see? What are you going to hear? Is there going to be a lot of crowd noise? Which is worse, competing with 10 million people watching and yelling, or complete silence? Be prepared for both. And everybody's been at a sporting event where, you know, running down the field, and the one voice you hear in the stands is mom's going, "Oh," right? It's amazing what our kids can tune into. What's it going to smell like in the arena? What are you going to feel? The more reps you get at this, the more you're going to be prepared. A few more to finish up. Activation, basically needing to increase your level of physiological arousal. And usually we think about, you know, relaxing and, because we're sort of amped up. But if you're really, really good at a task, some extra activation is going to help. I mean, it's not necessarily boring going down that track at 80 plus miles an hour, but if you've done it a lot, some athletes are doing that, steering and thinking about what they're going to eat. And they might need to increase their level of activation. So here's a good example of this.
Another play.
Well, this is a big moment for Schneider, and when you're in that zone like he has been the last three, it's great to get back in the net. And this is warm-up. I mean, doing his whole routine, understanding what he's going to do in the net, but this continued on for about a minute 27 seconds. And you think about just the focus and the intensity, guys skating around him, and he's just in his own little zone. And right now, just a real interesting time for the young goaltender getting his chance to take the net, albeit for a while.
So a lot of things got mentioned here. So, you know, presenting these things as discrete skills, but obviously done well, they sort of flow together. Imagery, activation, getting into the zone. So they all work together and complement each other pretty well. What about relaxation? The ability to calm your heart rate, calm your breathing, allow yourself to get into the hill. And it's funny, we talk about you know, being able to feel things when we're competing. I always want athletes, you know, to be able to work from the ground up in a lot of sports, whether it's golf and the swing, or figure skaters' blades getting into the ice, or really being able to feel the snow underneath you. And if your toes are frozen cold, it can be hard to do. So it makes extra sense to be able to relax and be able to flow down and be really connected. That's where a lot of our power comes from. So, can I do that? And have I practiced doing that? Because it's not going to be there under pressure unless you put in the time to know how to relax.
Darren Rounds, World Champion Ski Tips, presented by Bank of the West.
I'm Darren Rounds with another World Champion Ski Tip brought to you by Bank of the West. The start gate's a critical part of any race. What I try and do is like to get a good routine, so I'm not thinking about much except for the reaction out of the gate. Getting your hands placed up on the grips the right way, getting your correct body position, and be ready to fire. I mean, it's all about just like that quick move, using all the power you got, and doing the right technique to get out of the start gate as quick as possible, and have as much momentum as you can into the first turn. The way I try and relax is big, deep breaths, clearing your head, and going through that routine that you're used to doing through practice. I always grab the grips and make sure my wrists are kind of engaged, elbows are tight to the ribcage. You want to be ready to just pull and go. You're tense, you're locked in, and then it's all about going off the cue of the starter, watching for any movement of that gate to drop when you're pulling. Most of the power is coming from your core. If you're really low in your stance, you get to move up, and if you're really tall, you don't have much movement to like take advantage of that core strength. So like kind of a half squat. And for skiers, it's a good thing to put pressure on the gate if you can. The tips are pressing against the gate, and you're already locked and loaded. It's all about trying to get the head and the shoulders up over the feet, and keeping the head and shoulders down the whole time, and projecting all that speed momentum downhill. Maintain that snow contact from the gate into the drop. I always look for like an outside lane. Those lanes are typically faster because one side's going to be like going to the left turn or right turn. So you have a little more freedom to kind of like really put a good skate in. You're not going to get like pinched out. Once a gate drops, you do your thing, and then you got to try and improvise and fight for the first turn. No matter what event it is, the start is a really critical part of any competition, and it's part of your mental approach in building your confidence on the mountain.
So you heard in there is relaxation routine at the gate, right? Who caught that? What did he say? What helps him relax?
Breathing.
And I don't know Darren at all, right? But breathing. So that deep breath, ready to go. There is absolutely no way, I'm guessing, that was useful for him if he hadn't practiced it. If he didn't know what range of activation he needed to be in. So if you want that to work for you, work on that routine. Work on breathing as a way to increase your awareness, to relax your body, to get yourself ready to go, to make it easy to focus on the right things at the right time. So adaptive thinking is the last one that we're going to talk about. It's basically mindfulness. Second to last one we're going to talk about.
Pressure is an amazing thing. It can either help you rise to another level that you never even thought you could get to, or it could have the opposite effect and crack you. I've definitely been through both scenarios. Early on in my career, I would ride so well in practice, and then the minute it was time to drop in for my competition run, I would absolutely just choke from the pressure, the expectations, the potential. So in 2003, I won my very first X Games, and it was this crazy roller coaster of a day because I had not had great results with X Games before. But here I was hearing that I was supposed to be the favorite to win. And my very first run in qualifiers, I dropped in through my crippler, my new signature trick on the first run of the first hit, and I fell. So I got to the bottom of the half pipe and everything went pretty dark. Lots of negativity, thinking in my head, here I was supposed to win the X Games and I'm not even going to make it to finals. And then I looked up at the slopestyle course above us and also smiled because that's the course where I competed in so many US ASA contests and had so many breakthroughs and just kind of started being grateful for where I was and changed my mentality around.
Gretchen Plyler, she was our #1 qualifier, and she also is the hometown favorite.
So I dropped in for my second run and ended up nailing it, went from last place to first place and ended up winning the event.
And there it is, Crippler going for it again on that first hit. It's so risky to do because again, if she falls, the rest of the run is ruined.
Gretchen Plyler is this year's winner at Super Cup winner. She's a gold medalist.
Lots of times when you are feeling nervous or afraid, it's because you're thinking about the end result and you're not right here and right now. It means letting go of any fear, letting go to anything that might be holding you back. That's definitely how I want to live my life and how I try to live my life every day.
So, I don't know, Gretchen, I saw this on YouTube and I thought it was a pretty good example of adaptive thinking. I've talked to thousands of athletes who said, yeah, I really need to block it out, or I did a good job of blocking it out. Those that actually do a good job of it tend not to actually block it out. I mean, it's the cliche you've all heard of, don't think of something, or, just don't snowplow, right? And so I think it's a pretty good example of acknowledging something. And as she says, we trip ourselves up thinking about outcomes, but you can't block it out. You only have so much energy to use. You might as well focus it in the right way on performance. So don't waste energy trying to block something out. It's a waste of time. Instead, acknowledge it mindfully. Okay, that was the thought about, wow, that was awful. Wait, Alex said to describe it. I fell, and there's no way I'm going to get enough points to qualify, and we're off to the races with catastrophizing. But wait a minute, okay, let me just sit with that, and emotions aren't good or bad, or he said something about that, so that was a thought that was kind of unpleasant, didn't feel so good, so just give that a name, let it float on away, and mindfully bring myself back to, what do I have to do? I just got to drop in. I've practiced this a lot. Let me just stick to my plan. It's not the way Americans think typically. Not a very mindful culture in some ways. We do a great job of multitasking. Often that means doing a lot of things not as well as we could. It takes a lot of practice to mindfully acknowledge things and bring yourself back. It's the monkey mind, right? If I stop talking and shut up for a bit, one of the things you're going to hear is electrical noise. You haven't really been paying attention to that this whole time. Now that I bring your attention to it, oh yeah, it's kind of loud. You acknowledge that and bring yourself back to this like incredibly fascinating presentation. Thanks for practice. Automaticity, the final one I'm going to talk about, and then we'll just have discussion. Is it a skill you can train, or is it a result of all of these skills? I think it's both. You absolutely need to be able to trust yourself. Not mindlessly go on autopilot, but mindfully. Trust that you and your coach and your mom and dad have trained yourself to execute under any kind of pressure. Things seem to flow. Everybody talks about flow, and talk a bit about the research behind that. Everybody's been in the zone. Everybody in here at one time or another has been in the zone. Anybody been driving down Parleys and an elk jumps out in front of them? Just react. How did you do that? Right? Where everything just sometimes seems to slow down. Everybody's had some competitive event where all the world's colors just got richer and it came together. You saw yourself doing it a nanosecond before it happened, and then it's just like, wow, that was pretty cool. How'd I pull that off? Everybody's had that experience, but it's not luck. Right? When preparation and the right mindset and the appropriate level of skill come together. So I'll let these folks talk about it much better than I can. Dollar to anybody who can pronounce that.
You've got about an inch of ice in between you. That is life. And then you see the valley floor thousands of feet below you.
I was sliding out of control. I was going towards a crowd.
I can remember still what the rock looked like right when I grabbed the rope, the shine of the rope. Something in me knew I was going to maybe die right then.
You're in a state of absolute awareness without any effort.
It's definitely the highest form of concentration I've ever experienced.
I'm just perceiving things much more clearly, much more slowed down than normal.
It's when you're fully in sync, when you're making perfect decisions.
Pretty much everything falls away.
A superior form of consciousness. It's basically where life makes sense.
We can use the action of adventure sport athletes as case studies. We can apply this knowledge across all domains of society. We call this experience flow because the sensation you furnish that every action, every decision leads seamlessly, fluidly to the next. It's technically defined as a state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best.
You have to find a state of mind where you're able to make fast decisions that you aren't even aware that you're making.
Pattern recognition, future prediction, information processing. These skills are massively, massively amplified. So flow heightens intellectual performance, heightens creative performance, and heightens physical performance.
A lot of athletes that I work with basically wouldn't feel like they were alive if they didn't have it.
That's the only reason I'm putting myself in harm's way is for the heightened awareness.
It's hard to put words to it, but it's addictive, and that's what drives me to come back and do it again.
Every action, every decision leads seamlessly, fluidly to the next.
Being able to take those steps, slow them down, watch the videotape in your head, and then once you've connected all the dots, push the play button and it speeds back up and then you roll away.
Time dilates. Sometimes it slows down like in a car crash with that freeze frame effect. Sometimes it speeds up and 5 hours pass by in 5 minutes.
And the moment that everything slows down is that perfect moment of flow. And nothing is rushed, because a second is a hell of a long time.
And I think everyone has tapped into flow at some point in their life, that time where time stood still yet everything happened with infinite clarity.
That's the best part, is kind of letting go and seeing where it takes you. Knowing that, you have the capability to make those decisions, but kind of letting it happen.
When it becomes your purpose, some people are going to get it, and some people won't.
So the question at the heart of Rise of Superman is, what the hell's going on? Where is this coming from? And the answer is that these athletes have become better at hacking the state of flow than anybody else in the history of the world.
Some of the psychological skills that we teach as sports psychologists, and for me, as I've said, it rests on the foundation of resilience and identity, and I also want that to be embedded along the way in a really healthy developmental model, so that your kids not only persist, are intrinsically motivated, and enjoy the sport, but go out and dominate everybody else in a good way. So that's the end of the me standing up here speaking portion of this, and I'd love to just open it up to have a dialogue. Any questions, any comments? I'd love to hear if any of this resonated with any of your experiences. So if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, now would be the time. And if you're cold and hungry and you want to get out of here, that's fine. Thank you very much. Oh wait, we've got one. There's always one brave soul.
I'm just curious with very young athletes, that balance between push and the, not being outcome-based.
So the question was about the balance with very young athletes, about pushing versus not being outcome-based, and sort of depends on that developmental stage in many ways. I think that almost everything in life is negotiable. You get to decide as a parent what's not going to be negotiable. Not doing crack, not going to jail, that kind of thing, but outside of a few things, it's negotiable. So, if you really want to do this and your friends are doing it and you think it'd be fun, here's what's involved with this. I'm going to support you either way because, I love the effort, that's what I want to see. If you want to be good at this, then here's what it takes to be good, and here's the structure, and that means, you got to get your kit ready and have your cleats ready to go, and, if I have to spend 20 minutes looking for them, I'm probably not going to have time later to take you for ice cream, and right? So you can work in that push and pull balance, but it takes a very mindful structure and a well thought out plan ahead of time, and you can think about the best possible ways to do it, and then something surprising is going to come up. You have to make snap decisions about what to do. And so you don't need to be perfect about it. What we're modeling is not perfection, it's resilience. It's the adaptation when something comes up unexpected. And like I said, unless it's a situation where it's really abusive, I do believe in the value of teaching that persistence, that confidence, that it can come over time, and that if you integrate enough fun, immediately gratifying experiences, they'll stay with it. What I find in athletes is that when they give up sport, sometimes it can be for injury. Laura Lobert's our expert in town on injury and career transitions. It can be from aging out of the sport. But a lot of the time you'll hear, oh, I didn't like my coach. Or, oh, it wasn't fun anymore. Frequently, what I find the real answer to be is, I'm not progressing in my sport and everybody's passing me by. I was doing it for social reasons, and now 13 and up, everybody's sort of making that jump to more and more hours of deliberate practice, and that's why the coaches are so critical to work with and through coaches so much, because they're the ones frequently who have like the most daily influence over our athletes' sports progression. So I think if you really do a good job of listening, and I know that you do, find out what's intrinsically motivated. Find out when and where to push and provide that structure for them to learn how to progress on their own. And frequently, they'll let you know, it's passing me by, and then you can bring in some of this stuff around, well, it's appropriate to plateau. Maybe we need to change up our deliberate practice a little bit. But you're not going to continue to go like this. I don't want you to just be on a flat line the whole time. It's supposed to be a bit of a stair step, and let's really look at why it feels like you're not progressing. And that conversation happens whether they're 6 or 36. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
Going back to that young age, 6 to 12 or whatever, where play is so important, relating to, the sports, you're the gymnast. How do you, when you've got a kid that's training 16, 18 hours a week, get that play time at the young age when you're involved in that sport where you have to have that commitment at that young age?
Yeah, that's the tricky one, is when, for physical maturation reasons, you do have to peak at a very young age as compared to athletes who can continue to progress to elite status, age 19, 20, 30. What do you do with the gymnast? How do you balance that? One of the things I frequently will ask is, when does it become a job? When was the last time you enjoyed doing this? And why are you doing it? I was the athlete you had to kick out of the gym, but I wanted to keep doing backflips, so I enjoyed practice as much as I did competing. It didn't seem to become a job for me until college and beyond. So how do you balance that? It's really, really tricky. And to put things in the appropriate developmental language, but to keep bringing that focus back to the process and the enjoyment. And so yeah, there has to be a lot of deliberate practice at a young age in sports like that. But it wasn't 100% if you look at that chart. It could be 80-20. And you might have to work extra hard to carve out that time. But so-and-so's in the gym, and you want to go like fishing or skiing or, yeah. One of the things that I'll say to athletes, whether it's around, doing a variety of things to build in that creativity, to make sure that we're working biomechanics in a wide range of areas to prevent overuse injuries, to make sure that you're getting recovery time, which is not just physical, it's social, it's emotional, it's psychological. Talk about the research on recovery and how important it is. You can basically work athletes as hard as you want, as long as you recover them just as hard. And there's only so many hours in the day. I know maybe they go to school too. You got to sleep at some point. Don't be lazy about your recovery. And athletes hate being called lazy. Right? So I would put it in that category potentially. Look, do you want to be really good at this and burn out at 14? Potentially want to be an Olympic champion? Because even if you win a medal and you're hating every bit of your training, it's not going to feel good. So it takes, I think, extra work for parents and coaches with athletes who have to peak at that very early maturational age to build in that deliberate play. It's what you bid off when you get $1 as a gymnast. Thanks, Will. Comments, questions, thanks.
Are there any additional sports psychology related books or magazines or movies you would recommend?
I would. The question was, are there any other good books, resources, things I can recommend? Here is one, and there's a million that are out there. I've never written one, maybe I should at some point, but I absolutely love this one. There are a ton of great books about coaching and sports psychology. This one's called Coaching Mental Excellence. Ralph Bernanke, Rick McGuire, David Cook. Just absolutely one of the best. Highlights the role of the coach. The athlete meets sport at the coach. It's one of the best ways ever to start a book. You're watching your son or daughter track meet, several laps around, 100 meters to go, 50 meters to go, pulling even with her competitors, and do you really need to know the outcome of that to be proud of your child? It's an excellent book about coaching mental excellence and using sport as a way to develop as a person. So that would be one of my recommendations.
The talent code talks a lot of people talk about investment in athlete.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes more into like the science of practicing.
An excellent recommendation. The Talent Code, I think, is Dan Coyle. Absolutely terrific book. I love it when really smart people can put things in language that I can understand. So I definitely recommend that one as a resource for all parents and coaches if you haven't read it. I think it's an excellent one. Thanks for the suggestion. Sir?
Okay, what's the first book that you mentioned?
Positive Pushing, Jim Taylor. A lot of the research and the stuff I looked at and presented on the developmental model of sport participation is John Cote, C-O-T-E, but you go to the ISSP website, it's their position stand on how to develop elite sport athletes in a balanced way. And that last one was Coaching Mental Excellence. It's late, and I appreciate it on a cold, snowy night. Thank you very much for being here.